How are you, my dear students? Are you all maintaining the statutes or restrictions of lockdown? Are you all at home? I suppose you are, and you are all maintaining the health and hygiene and all the cleanliness that we need to adopt to keep away the contagious coronavirus. Okay, my dear students, I am going to tell you something first about the online classes, and then I am going to enter into my subject matter. We were trying for long to form a group so that we can continue classes, online classes during this lockdown period, because there will be a long hiatus or stoppage of study if we don't adopt these online classes. So we took initiative of forming a group in which some of our sincere teachers, they came forward and made it possible, and then we went on to continue this online class. Let's talk about something else. As you know, the teachers of other subjects, they have already started teaching you, but I am today basically going to give you an introductory lecture or an introduction. It's not an introduction of myself, but it's about my teaching, about what I'm going to teach you, and how you will sort of react to me, or how you will respond to me, or how you will give a feedback to me. I am going to teach you English, as you know, but firstly I'm going to tell you that I'm going to teach you a poem, and this poem is the first one in the sequence of class 12. The name of the poem is On Killing a Tree. This On Killing a Tree is written by G. Patel. Now, before I am going to enter this poem, I have to tell you about the background of Indian English poetry, which is otherwise named Indo-Anglian poetry. In this particular name, we shall henceforth call this kind of poetry. Now, Indo-Anglian poetry, it has a history or a background of say 100 or 150 years, since when some Indian writers, they started writing in English, and obviously the father of Indian English poetry was Louis Vivian Desrosiers, Henry Louis Vivian Desrosiers. He was, in a sense, a father of Indo-Anglian poetry, though his idiomatic expression was very much British or English. Now, the Indo-Anglian poetry can be divided historically into two phases. One was the pre-independent Indian English poetry, and the other was post-independence Indian English poetry or Indo-Anglian poetry. Now, what is the difference between these two phases? The poets of the pre-independence in Indo-Anglian poetry, they adopted a sort of British idiom in writing poetry. They chose, or rather imitated, the British idiomatic expressions, especially those of the English Romantic poets, and subject matter, the way of expression, the use of voice, the tonal quality, whatever. In all respect, they simply imitated the English writers, and it was difficult to actually identify them from their writing, whether they were actually the Indo-Anglian writers or they are English writers. Because if you read poems of Desrosiers, or say of Sarojini Naidu, or say of our own Michael Madhusudan Dutt, we will see how they imitate the English writers. Now, the post-independence in Indo-Anglian writers, poets, they revolted against this kind of tradition, if you may call it. How did they do it? They wanted to give expressions of their own. They wanted to express their own everyday experiences, the contemporary life, the contemporary Indian life. That is what they wanted to express in their writings. and they did not want to copy or imitate the English idiomatic expression, because they knew that the English idiomatic expression was no longer relevant in the then Indian socio-cultural economic scenario. So they wanted to adopt a particularly Indian attitude to poetry, and they wanted to write from their own experiences using their own language, though obviously in English, and their own thoughts without directly imitating the English writers. Now, Jeev Patel is one of them. The father of Indo-Anglian poetry in the post-independence phase is or was Nissim Ezekiel. Now, we should not discuss Indo-Anglian poetry without discussing Nissim Ezekiel. I am not entering into a detailed discussion about Nissim Ezekiel's poetry. I am going to tell you about Jeev Patel, the kind of poetry he writes, and Jeev Patel's personal background. Now, Jeev Patel is a man from Mumbai or Bombay. He is originally a physician and a painter, and he writes poems as well, and he conducts a poetry workshop every year for the budding poets. We don't know whether we can learn to write poetry by attending poetry workshops, but Patel believes that he can teach how to write poetry to young aspirants who want to write poetry. But that apart, what we have to know about this poetry is that, about this poem is that, what is a free verse? Because this poem is a free verse. Now we have to know about free verse. Free verse or vers libre is originally French poem, because vers libre originated in France. It is in the early of the 20th century. It is nothing but an unrhymed lines of poems in which a prosaic rhythm is maintained, and there are not end stop lines as it happens in conventional poems. That means you will hardly see pauses at the end of each line. The end of any line may come, in fact, in the middle of a line, and these kind of lines where meanings sort of percolate or continue from one line to another is called run-on lines, and this kind of running on lines are contrasted against the conventional end-stop lines. So you have to understand the difference between end-stop lines and run-on lines. Vers libre, they use run-on lines, and conventional poems they use end-stop lines. Now, Jeev Patel too used this particular free verse and uses end-stop lines. Now, what is the advantage of using free verse or using end-stop lines, run-on lines? The advantage of using run-on lines or free verse is that it makes or gives you a conversational tone or a conversational ease. So the poem, instead of remaining a strict poem, it becomes a sort of conversation, as if the speaker or the narrator or the poet, he or she is conversing with you in a frank manner, in a sort of homely conversation. So the graveness of a poem, the difficulty of a poem will not bother you. You will read a poem in a mode of a conversation. In fact, this poem is written in a mode of conversation, and we'll see how Jeev Patel keeps on this mode of conversation in the poem while getting his message through. And one of the hallmarks of this poem is the use of irony. Now, what is irony? We'll see it later. Thank you.